Okay, hopefully this is my last response video for a while. Today we're going to look at Capitalist Kid's most recent video at the date of this video, titled Why Democracy Sucks. Now, for a so-called anarchist, I thought I'd be some of a fan towards it, since anarchism in practice and historically has has always applied democracy, but it wasn't direct democracy like we claim to have today. It's indirect democracy, which is quite different from direct democracy. But anyway, let us continue and see his stance on democracy. First off, 51% wouldn't hecking take away the rights for the 41%. Even in a direct democracy, that wouldn't happen unless the 41% were threatening the existence of the capitalist state, which could the capitalist state and or state. But it still doesn't even take into account that into account at all indirect democracy. That's cool for a so-called anarchist. And if that was true, the election that happened a year ago in America would mean all Hillary supporters and or people that just voted for Hillary would have their rights stripped. That hasn't happened at all. So I love how you base off your first claim on or argument on a Thomas Jefferson quote, who was the architect of the Indian Removal Act, something very non-democratic, since the natives were in American territory and were able to vote on the act and the people in general. And of course, he used the wolves and sheep, quote unquote, example instead of using failures of actual democracy that happened in history. Jesus Christ. But anyway, let us continue. And when he states that democracy is a form of extreme statism, he ignores history again. Look at anarchist Catalonia Valencia, you absolute moron. And of course, he forgets about indirect democracy in general, again, which doesn't even need a state. Direct democracy somewhat does. And for some reason, he says that in America, democracy somehow is weakening your gun rights and bloody freedom of speech. I would like to have an actual example of this from him, but I'll give him multiple to help prove his point somewhat. My example is the fact that the Communist Party and even communist and or socialist and leftist songs in general were banned for a large amount of time in America during the Red Scares. And not to mention that there's a massive crackdown on trade unions during trade unions. Look at what happened in Everett 3 years before the Red Scare started, first one, and the Centralia Massacre. And all of these were caused by protest and or strike due to bad wages and bourgeoisie exploitation. And not to mention many acts were put into place to crack down on trade unions and organized labor. But that's enough evidence for now to prove that America isn't democracy like it claims to be. And these massacres and events weren't caused by democracy. These were caused by oligarchic capitalist system that favors to keep the capitalists in power and not have the workers in power. But let's continue. Also, the government that they didn't want the trade unions to gain more influence and popularity. But that's enough evidence for now. So let's move on. And the government already did quote unquote vote to genocide its people but many years after it initially started the Native American genocide. The only real legislation or act that advocated for genocide in America was the Indian Removal Act that removed most all of the natives from the southern USA by force, and it was enforced by the military and state. But it wasn't necessarily true democracy, since the people weren't able to vote on it. Congress voted on it, of course, it passed, and that example doesn't necessarily make sense. He keeps forgetting that indirect democracy exists and the minority could just fight back in democracies. You can still have wars and conflicts over conflicting ideals and democracy. Look at Spain before the Civil War in 1936 under Manuel Azana. And The rich are oppressing the people. Jesus Christ, please look at real historical examples or facts. Instead of random hypothetical situations backed upon nothing. Also, I'd like to point this out, which is worse. The oppression of the small majority, the small minority, or the majority oppressing the small minority. And not to mention that the minority, exploited the majority, as in the bourgeoisie exploits the proletariat, as in making them work and be wage slaves. Okay, I don't understand how he's able to pull the human nature card on an argument against democracy. He just randomly claims that all humans are self-interested, which somehow debunks democracy, but he ignores the fact that you can have democracy under collectivism, i.e. the Soviet Union under Lenin and the Máquina Machina, and the anarchists in Catalonia and the Zapatistas. And one of the last things to point out is that he uses no sources for this video. It's 1 minute and 30 seconds long, and especially for the part where he says people usually vote for what does best for them as an individual. I would somewhat believe this, but he doesn't say in any certain country and or direct democracy, indirect democracy, and has no sources. And yes, people do vote for things that benefit the majority of the populace. An example of this was in the Spanish general election in 1936, which started the Civil War, and the majority of the people, voted for the Communist Party. With the Communist Party, which would benefit the majority. And for the finale, he calls the trash heap that is his video a debunk of the entirety of democracy in 1 minute without any sources. Jesus Christ. Can you actually do an in-depth video about why you dislike something and actually have sources? And of course, make sure to hecking crush that like button. And my tweeters is in the description. Enjoy.